This is the IELTS listening test. You will hear a number of different recordings and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 parts. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. Now turn to Part 1.
Part 1.
You will hear a telephone conversation between an employer from the Wild Dune Spa and Resort and an applicant. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 5. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
Hello, is this John Murphy?
Hi, yes it is.
Hi John, this is Ed Heisenberg from the Wild Dune Spa and Resort, calling about your application for our lifeguard position. Do you have a few minutes to talk?
Yes, absolutely.
Great, could you give me your address?
Sure. My address is 45 Elsinore Court.
I'm sorry, was that Eleanor? Could you spell that for me?
Sure, it's Elsinore. E-L-S-I-N-O-R-E.
Okay, thanks. And is this the number we should reach you at in the future? 099885767?
No, that's my home phone. But let me give you my mobile number instead. 077-896-245. Call me on that one.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. Could you tell me your availability?
Sure, I'm usually available during afternoons or weekends. I'd prefer not to be scheduled on weeknights because I work part-time as a waiter.
That shouldn't be a problem, since we don't stay open very late anyway. And do you have any other employment experience?
Yes, I've worked at a few other places. I was the baseball coach at Richmond High School last season.
I see. And do you have any other experience that you would like us to note on your application?
Yes. Last year I worked at the beach as a rescue diver.
Rescue diver? That sounds intense.
Well, it's really just like being a lifeguard, except in the ocean instead of pool. So kind of like being a lifeguard at the world's largest pool.
I see.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 6 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 6 to 10.
So could you tell me about the relevant skills you have? I'm guessing a lot given your experience.
I'm CPR certified and have 2 years of diving experience.
Great, it sounds like you are well qualified for this position. When does your CPR certification expire?
I think in November, but let me quickly check my CPR card. Actually, it expires in October.
Okay, so regardless, you have it through the end of the summer. When is your ideal time to work?
Since I work in the restaurant on weeknights, I like weekends best, specifically Saturday mornings.
I see. We do already have a lot of staff available on Saturdays, but I do need an early morning shift lifeguard. How early could you work Saturday morning?
I can get there by 6 o'clock if need be.
You'll be happy to know we open a little later than that, but I'll put you down for Saturday mornings here.
Oh, awesome. I can't wait to get started.
How about you come in next Saturday, the 12th?
That sounds good.
Great. We can figure out other shifts for you to work when you come in then. One last thing, just out of curiosity, where did you hear about us?
I heard your ad on the radio while I was driving this morning.
You know, I think you're the first person who has responded to our radio ads. It's almost always people who have seen us in the newspaper.
Yeah, I don't have time to read through the newspaper every morning. I've plenty of time in the car to listen to radio ads.
That makes sense. Well, thanks for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the 12th.
That is the end of Part 1. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 1.
Part 2.
You will hear a man being interviewed on local radio about a plan to improve a suburb called Red Hill. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 13. Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 13.
Good morning and welcome again to Your City Today. With me today is Graham Campbell, a councillor from the City Council. He'll be telling us about the plan to improve the fast-growing suburb of Red Hill. Good morning, Graham, and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Carol.
Now, Graham, I understand that there has been a lot of community consultation for the new plan.
Yes, we've tried to address some of the concerns that local groups told us about. People we've heard from are mainly worried about traffic in the area and in particular the increasing speed of cars near schools. They feel that it's only a matter of time before there's an accident as a lot of children walk to the school. So we're trying to do something about that. Another area of concern is the overhead power lines. These are very old and a lot of people we spoke to asked if something could be done about them. Well, I'm happy to report that the power company have agreed to move the power lines underground at a cost of $800,000. I think that will really improve the look of the area as well as being safer.
That's good to know. But will that mean an increase in rates for the local businesses in that area?
Well, the power company have agreed to bear the cost of this themselves after a lot of discussion with the council. This is wonderful news, as the council now has some extra funds for us to put into other things like tree planting and artwork.
Before you hear the rest of the interview, you have some time to look at questions 14 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 14 to 20.
Now, we've also put together a map which we've sent out to all the residents in the area. And on the map we've marked the proposed changes. Firstly, we'll plant mature pine trees to provide shelter and shade just to the right of the supermarket in Days Road. In order to address the traffic problems, the pavements on the corner of Carberry and Thomas Street will be widened. This will help to reduce the speed of vehicles entering Thomas Street. We think it's very important to separate the local residential streets from the main road, so the roadway at the entrance to Thomas Street from Days Road will be painted red. This should mark it more clearly and act as a signal for traffic to slow down. One way of making sure that the pedestrians are safe is to increase signage at the intersections. A Keep Clear sign will be erected at the junction of Evelyn Street and Hill Street to enable traffic to exit at all times. Something we're planning to do to help control the flow of traffic in the area is to install traffic lights halfway down Hill Street where it crosses Days Road. Now, we haven't only thought about the cars and traffic, of course. There's also something for the children. We're going to get school children in the area to research a local story, the life of a local sports hero perhaps. And an artist will incorporate that story into paintings on the wall of a building on the other side of Hill Street from the supermarket. And finally, we've agreed to build a new children's playground, which will be at the other end of Hill Street, close to the intersection with Carberry Street.
Wonderful. Now, what's the next stage?
Well, the final plan will...
That is the end of Part 2. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 2.
Part 3.
You will hear a seminar with Dr. Martin Merriweather of the Antarctic Centre in Christchurch, New Zealand. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 26. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 26. We're pleased to welcome Dr. Martin Merriweather of the Antarctic Centre in Christchurch, New Zealand, who has come along to talk to us today about the role of the centre and the Antarctic Treaty. Now, my first question is about the choice of location for the centre. Why Christchurch? Was it because of the climate?
Well, actually, New Zealand is the second closest country to Antarctica, and Christchurch is often used on Antarctic expeditions.
Right, so it's because of where we are, coupled with our historical role. So tell us, what is the main purpose of the centre?
Oh, well, we have two complementary roles. One is as a scientific base for expeditions and research, and the other is as an information centre.
Tell us something about the role as a scientific base.
Well, we're able to provide information about what scientists should take with them to the South Pole. For example, the centre contains a clothing warehouse where expeditions are supplied with suitable clothing for the extreme conditions.
I suppose you need a bit more than your normal winter coat.
Yes, exactly. And then there's also the specialist library and mapping services.
Right. And which countries are actually located at the centre?
Well, the centre houses research programs for New Zealand, for the United States, as well as for Italy. There's even a US post office at the American Air Force Base here.
Really? And what does the visitor centre offer?
Well, since very few people will ever experience the Antarctic firsthand, the Visitors Centre aims to recreate the atmosphere of Antarctica. There's a mock campsite where you can see inside an Antarctic tent and imagine yourself sleeping there. And the centre also acts as a showcase for the unique international cooperation which exists in Antarctica today.
What is it actually like at the South Pole? I know you've been there on a number of occasions.
Yes, I have, and each time I'm struck by the awesome beauty of the place. It's magnificent, but you can really only visit it in the summer months.
October to March?
Yes, because it's completely dark for 4 months of the year. And, in addition, it has to be the coldest place on Earth.
Colder than the North Pole? Why is that?
Well, unlike the North Pole, which is actually a frozen sea, Antarctica is a landmass shaped like a dome, with the result that the winds blow down the slopes at speeds of up to 150 kilometres an hour, and that's what makes it so cold. And one other interesting thing is that Antarctica is the driest continent on Earth, surprisingly, and so you have to drink large amounts of water when you're there.
How old is Antarctica?
We're pretty sure it was part of a larger landmass, but it broke away from the rest of the continent 170 million years ago.
How can you be certain of this?
Because fossils and rocks have been discovered in Antarctica, which are the same as those found in places such as Africa and Australia.
Amazing. To think that it was once attached to Africa.
Before you hear the rest of the interview, you have some time to look at questions 27 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 27 to 30.
Now, let's just have a look at the Antarctic Treaty. How far back does the idea of an international treaty go?
Well, as far back as the 19th century, when 11 nations organised an international event.
When was that exactly?
In 1870, and it was called the Polar Research Meeting. And then, not long after that, they organised something called the First International Polar Year.
And that took place when exactly?
Over 2 years, from 1882 to 1883. But it wasn't until the 1950s that the idea of an international treaty was proposed. And in 1959, the treaty was actually signed.
What do you see as the main achievements of the treaty?
Well, firstly, it means that the continent is reserved for peaceful use.
That's Article 1, isn't it?
Yes.
That's important, since the territory belongs to everyone.
Yes, but not as important as Article 5, which prohibits any nuclear explosions or waste disposal.
Which is marvellous. Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to stop there, because I'm afraid we've run out of time. Thanks for coming along today and telling us all about the centre and its work.
That is the end of Part 3. You now have 30 seconds to check your answers to Part 3.
Part 4.
You will hear a lecture about a species of bird called the New Caledonian crow. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
I'm going to talk today about research into a particular species of bird, the New Caledonian crow, whose natural habitat is small islands in the Pacific Ocean. And it seems that these crows are exceptionally resourceful. Using sticks or other tools to find food isn't unknown among birds and animals. Some chimpanzees, for example, are known to bang nuts on stones in order to break the shell and get at the edible kernel inside. One New Caledonian crow, called Betty, bent some straight wire into a hook and used it to lift a small bucket of her favourite food from a vertical pipe. This experiment was the first time she'd been presented with wire, which makes it very impressive. Another crow, called Barney, has demonstrated his skill at using sticks to forage for food. In one research project, scientists from New Zealand and Oxford set captive New Caledonian crows a 3-stage problem. If they wanted to extract food from a hole, the crows first had to pull up a string to get a short stick, then use that short stick to remove a long stick from a toolbox, and finally use the long stick to reach the food. Amazingly, they worked out how to do this successfully. Further experiments carried out at Oxford suggest that crows can also use sticks as tools to inspect all sorts of objects, possibly to assess whether or not they present a danger. The idea for the experiment came from observing the birds using tools to pick at random objects, such as a picture of a spider that was printed on some cloth. In this research, 5 pairs of crows, including Barney, underwent tests to see how they would react to a variety of objects, which were carefully chosen so the birds wouldn't be tempted to view them as a possible source of food. As a further precaution, all the crows had been fed beforehand. On 8 occasions, a bird's first contact was by using a tool. In all 3 trials, Barney began by using a stick for inspection. One involved a rubber snake. First he approached it, but didn't touch it, then retreated to pick up a stick. He then prodded it with the stick. After some more investigation, he discarded the stick and carried on pecking at the snake more confidently, apparently convinced that it wouldn't move. In other experiments, 2 different birds, called Pierre and Corbeau, also made a first approach with tools on 3 separate occasions. Pierre used a short piece of wood chip to touch a light which was flashing, and Corbeau was seen prodding a metal toad with a stick. Significantly, the crows tended to use the sticks only to make their first contact with the object. Subsequently, they either ignored the object or dropped the tool and pecked at the object, which is very different from using the tool to get access to food. So, what conclusions can be drawn from the research? Evidence is building up from experiments such as these that the birds are able to plan their actions in advance, which is very interesting for understanding their cognition. They don't seem to be responding in a pre-programmed sort of way. It may even be possible that they're able to view a problem and work out what the answer is. However, a major difficulty is assessing whether this tool-using behaviour is a sign of intelligence. To some extent, this is related to the ecological circumstances in which the animal is found. So, scientists want to find out much more about how the crows behave in their native habitat, and a team from Exeter and Oxford universities is carrying out research in New Caledonia. They're looking into whether the birds' way of searching for food gives them any possible evolutionary advantage. The birds are hard to observe, as they live in a region of mountainous forest, so the researchers have attached tiny cameras to the tails of some birds as one method of investigating their behaviour. The birds are masters at using sticks to find their food, in particular beetle larvae from the trees. It's possible that the birds can derive so much energy from these grubs that they only need to eat a few each day. This would mean that they wouldn't have to spend most of their waking time searching for food, as most animals do. The beetle larvae have a distinct chemical makeup, which can be traced through the feathers and blood of birds that eat them. Scientists have collected samples from crows in order to estimate the proportion of larvae in their diet. They should then be able to gauge the extent to which individual birds depend on using sticks to feed themselves. We have learnt a great deal about the ability of New Caledonian crows to use tools, and some very interesting research is being carried out into them.
That is the end of Part 4. You now have 1 minute to check your answers to Part 4.